What's up, everybody? Welcome to No, not welcome to Restaurants. In fact, welcome to My Modern Myth. Yes, welcome to My Modern Myth. Still with Adam and Eric. I'm Eric, and this bewildered gentleman next to me is Adam.
Why, Eric, what's with the name change?
Well, I think, Adam, that's a great topic for today's podcast, perhaps. And my daughter is calling me. She's just heard this and said, "You've changed the show, Father? Why?"
Hey, Eric is talking to his daughter.
Hey, Ava. Ava, I'm in a podcast, so I can't talk to you. Okay, bye. Love you. It's always the saddest sound.
You're such a great dad, though, because I wouldn't even pick up the phone. I'd be like,
well, my kids are very invested in the show, and if they hear that I've changed the name, they're like, "Well, what's the rebrand, Father?" And I'm like, "I'll tell you later when we put you to bed. I'll hold your hand.
My spidey sense was tingling."
What?
Big rebrand on the Restaurants podcast.
Father, I'm bewildered. I'm befuddled. So what is this change? Well, the change, my dear, now I'm talking to you, not you're not my dear. Yes. If that makes you feel good, you're my dear too.
Sounds like a really awkward spam email, like "Hello, dear."
Yeah. Oh, I get those on Instagram. Yeah. I love those. "Hi, my dear. I've noticed that your content would be perfect for my content, and would you like a collab?" Yes, I would like a collab.
Let's collab.
So let's collab, and then nothing ever happens.
I thought, by the way,
out.
I was told to by my wife, which I have to do it now, to take all of those friend invites that I get from AI, people that are usually like super attractive women, and have things like, "Wow, weather is great today, and the food is amazing," and just like a picture of a generic thing, and just read those posts and say AI or real guy or something.
That's a whole that's a whole internet detective.
Anyway, but that's not the rebrand. So
that's not the Modern Myth. No. So the rebrand necessitated because things evolve. When I started this, it was always going to evolve. When I started jiu-jitsu, the reason I was doing jiu-jitsu, it was going to evolve. When I did triathlon, it was going to evolve. Like, we're on a constant phase of evolution somehow. So it's okay to evolve. And what I recognized through feedback from people and my own understanding of what I was doing was branding the podcast Restaurants was specifically a way to talk about jiu-jitsu and that idea of what do you do in between rolls? How do you recover? And it was very specific that way. And I realized that my passion is jiu-jitsu for sure, but that's 1/3 of my passion. And I wanted to talk about 3/3 of my passion on this show, in this one show. So it doesn't change anything really. It's just broadening the name to more closely align itself with what I believe and what my philosophies are. And that Modern Myth is our story. We don't have a lot of mythology now. This mythology was something in the ancient times that was really related to gods and explaining impossible circumstances, trying to explain this moral of a story that, there was no TikTok. So the stories had to come from somewhere.
Back in the olden days?
Back in the olden days, there was no TikTok.
It was Facebook back then.
Yeah, and there's nude wrestling too. So we have made progress, and we also have not made progress. I'll let you decide which one, naked wrestling or TikTok, is progress and which one isn't, because I know that's a personal choice. And Modern Myth is my answer to that, because what I've realized since leaving the military, since having my depression, suicide, all of these drug addictions and alcohol abuse and trauma and trial and tribulation has been, I own 3 things. And that is my mind, my body, and my story. That is my life story. How I use my mind and body, how I feed and fuel my mind and body writes that life story. And how I reflect on my life story with my mind dictates what I do with my body. Or my body becomes an outward manifestation of the internal conversation I'm having with my mind based on what I'm reflecting on in my life, my past, and how I'm using that to fuel myself going forward. So everything fits into this psychological principle, archetypes. We'll talk about, we talk about jiu-jitsu. We're going to always talk about sport, because sport is the most effective way we can test our body. We can get our body moving in a modern society where mythology has been largely put online, where we don't have a lot of need to be physical. Like we are in offices, we're in desks, we're working from home, and it's easy to go through a whole day without moving. And so we're losing that a bit. And I was losing that a lot. So my myth became a story of how do I reclaim that and exploring all the different avenues. So it's all fair game here. Like I said, nothing changes about the show really except the name, because I wanted it to be more inclusive. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, totally. And that's a good representation. We were talking off camera microphone. Well, on microphone, but off cam. No, on camera too.
Off record.
Off record.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we were talking off record on
That's a weird sentence.
about this very thing. Yeah, about this very thing that the way that we communicate, the way that we talk, is really it is a mindset and story show, and we want to accentuate those stories. We have a lot of stories, and we want to share those stories. So let's share some stories together.
Yeah, let's do it. One of the things that we were talking about right before this was this idea. Jumping into it, I as a coach have helped people connect with their story. Right, like that's part of the, I don't know, my philosophy. Like I said, it's like you have all of these things going on, but everything that you're experiencing is really how are you reflecting on the situation at hand. And as a speaker, it's my job to go and tell my story and the reflections I've learned from it. So my modern myth is not a place, a philosophy. It's not a show. It's not a group that is here to tell you how to change your life. It's how I changed my life, and I offer that to you to try and see what works for you and what doesn't. It's here to say, Adam changed his life with this. Maybe there's something in there for you. This person has changed their life with this, and perhaps that's something you can add to your toolbox or give it a shot, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But it is not a place where we judge each other. And as Adam was saying, there's imposter syndrome with this speaking idea that I go to a venue to speak. Who's going to care? What possible connection to my story could someone derive? And that's usually because I haven't suffered enough. I haven't overcome enough. My addiction wasn't bad enough. My relationships weren't abusive enough. My struggle was not grave enough. The reason I attempted suicide was a stupid reason. Why would anyone want to hear that story? Well, if you're connected to it from a passionate way, in a reflective and a healed way, everybody should. And those who don't are resistant to it. So that imposter syndrome is really our way of blocking that growth, that risk, because as soon as I risk it, I want to stop telling my story, because I get all these little haters that come on and tell me that. And that somehow is a lot louder than the people who are supportive. But yeah, that imposter syndrome really wrecks us, right, Adam? Because if you don't believe your story is good enough, just because it's your story, how do you overcome that, you know?
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, and every story, regardless of how big or small or you know what we would perceive as big or small or significant or insignificant or whatever you may have, when you listen to real storytellers, and there's a way to make anything compelling. And this is the beauty of stories, and you know this, is that we can learn lessons from every minute detail on the planet based on the stories we can tell about it. I saw the other day, I was in this seminar, and we were watching a marketing expert on stage just talking about how to market some of these things, and she just drew a stick figure on the whiteboard really quick, and it was insignificant. It didn't really amount for anything. She was just drawing a stick figure, a person to represent a person. There was this guy that was sitting in front of me, and I know this for a fact because I just know who he was. He had sold like multi-million-dollar businesses and built them from scratch, and so like it's like, wow, that guy's a smart guy. He knows his stuff. He stands up and he takes a picture of the stick figure. And, a lot of people take pictures of slides or things that people do. But I'm just like, well, wait, why is he, I got in my head, I was like, why did he take a picture of this stick figure? And I'm just thinking, well, that's kind of weird, but he must know what he's doing. These guys for all I know, he could have been, but he could have been, just saying, I'm going to like a joke. Look how stupid the stick figure looks. It looks like I'm going to send it to my friend. But, but the story that I interpreted and the story that was being told to me was like, this guy took the time to stand up and take a picture of this. I better stand up and take a picture of it too. And sure enough, I look around the room and I'm not the only one who's copying this guy. And I realize, that's why that guy's an influencer and a millionaire. He's leading the charge on things that we are doing, which might be stupid otherwise, but there they are. But that's the power of like what stories we're telling ourselves or how we interpret them. They could be minute details, but they could be powerful stories. That's why I really don't like the stories that are being told about fitness or dieting or things like that. Like, oh yeah, everybody's got to try keto. Look at this, like, intermittent fasting. Look at triathlon for everybody or jujitsu for everybody or this. I mean, no, it is finding the pieces that work for you and knowing what works. And that's what we want to get from the story is what our interpretations are and how we can apply them to our own situation. Everybody's situation is going to be different.
Yeah, that's maybe what I should button my part up with on that was, I love Navy SEALs. I respect them. I love hearing from them and all the special operators, even the Jockos, the Goggins. I learn from them. But the problem becomes if I compare myself to them. If anyone compares themselves or sets that's the standard of, well, I shouldn't complain because my life is way better. I've experienced so much less than them. Don't conflate their story with yours as far as a metric of what is and isn't traumatic, what isn't disturbing, and what you need or don't need to acknowledge in your own life. Because I see that a lot too with people. It's like, no, how do you connect with that story? Like, be inspired. But when I was in a room with other veterans and we were all taking 6 minutes to share our story, and I cried during mine.
Yeah.
Surprise. And honestly, it was surprising. I'll share this little tidbit is the part that I broke down on because I had been going through therapy, but the part that I started crying on, because if you share your story, you'll find and heal parts of it. You'll find new parts of it that all of a sudden are like, oh my God, why is this hitting me? Well, it's because you've dealt with this part and now it opened up your ability to go to this level. And it's 4-dimensional. Healing is 4-dimensional, Time is that 4th dimension, and healing allows you to heal in this part. And I was like, the trauma, blah, 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 this happened. And then I realized I was alone and had no friends. And I was like, why am I crying at that part? The realization of me being alone and not having anybody became this trauma. And I had blocked it out with a lot of other things. And so in my, story, I share, and then it goes on to the next person. And this guy had, been abused by his mother and father sexually, uncle, and it was just, oh my God. And I'm crying for this guy as he cries, but that guy cried for me when I was talking about being bullied and my little abuse as a kid. And in that moment, as we're all going and weeping for each other, it was an extension of our heart and compassion and not one of judgment. And all we were allowed to say after each person spoke was thank you or me too, if we could relate. Not me too. It happened to me a whole lot more than you, or it was just, I felt that too. And so when you are able to witness each other in that way and just hold their story, there's incredible power in that because you feel heard, and it's gotta be, it has to happen. Like I found it has to happen. You have to be held and heard by somebody at some time. Otherwise you're sitting in your room scribbling on a piece of paper, people like me or whatever. And it doesn't fully process because grief has to be witnessed. If it's just said to you and you acknowledge it, it's not enough. It's a step. And we talk about steps. And
so what I'm hearing there is really powerful. And I wanted to kind of emphasize, because what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's not just the hearing of other people's stories as an inspirational tactic for the benefit of the listener, but for the benefit of the storyteller to heal.
Yeah.
That's something we have to focus on too.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And an example of that, I got into this conflict with the guy because I'd said that. He was giving a speech and he was telling me how, he had his traumas and he had healed his traumas. And so he's told this story so many times, thousands of times, that he was performing. He says, I could cry. Do you want me to cry for this take? And I was like, yeah, sure. Because I was filming him. And he cried. And he's like, did it look real? I was like, yeah. Sure did. Now I don't trust you for one. And then we got into a conflict later, and I had told him, like, dude, you tell your story, but you don't feel it because you're not healed. But because he was accusing me of being a weak man, of not being healed and healthy, and just really vomiting on me. And I stood up for myself because I was sick of it. And he really got mad when I suggested that you say I haven't healed. I've told my story to thousands of people, and to say that I haven't healed, I'm like, you've manufacture emotion. You're not feeling it. You're telling it. If you're telling it, you're not addressing it. You're not letting it change you. When we share our stories, it changes us because it changes our connection, because if you're open to it, it draws new connections. You realize new things. If Adam, you and I sit and tell our stories every week for a year, I promise you by the end of that time, we'll have made connections to our story we never realized. It's same as going to jiu-jitsu and realizing, holy crap, I want to lose this match because I don't want to make my dad mad. Yeah. Because that was a key decision. I would have never gotten there if I didn't go to jiu-jitsu and realize that, and then overcome it by beating the guy. Yeah. This is the power of putting yourself in the situation and vulnerability, which is why it's one of our core values. You got to be vulnerable. You have to let your story surprise you. Otherwise, you'll never get to that next level of healing.
Well, I can absolutely resonate with that. And from the standpoint of telling our own stories, I had that opportunity when I wrote my book, which is called Shifting Gears from Anxiety to Addiction to Triathlon World Championship.
Handy.
When I did the audiobook, so it took me 3 years to write that book. It took me a long time to write the book and get it edited. So over that time, there was certainly a level of healing and coming to terms with a lot of the stuff that I was going through, and difficulty in writing some pieces over the 3 years. But nothing compared to the 2 days that I spent reading it for 8 hours each day to record the audiobook. I mean, you get in front of there, and I was telling this story, and I was being told to give it more emphasis, give more meaning to, and actually tell that story. And you're absolutely right, becoming more connected to that story and realizing, oh my gosh, I haven't processed that yet.
Yeah.
Or, oh my gosh, I need to process that more. I'm going through that again now as I start to develop my speaking career, and I'm building a keynote, trying to be in service of other people. It's like I'm learning more about what I need to process. It's incredible.
Yeah. There's a key element of sharing from your scars, not your wounds, that goes into that too. And I really want to be clear on this, because that process is dangerous without support. If you have, I'm talking about like deep scarring, traumatic things that you haven't resolved. There's obviously embarrassing situations that you could be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just shared that with you. You're probably going to be okay. Right. I'm not talking about that.
So my many nutcake moments,
you can share those.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Share from the swelling, not the squeals.
Share from the swelling, not from the gaping wounds. Okay.
Ooh, that's a rough one. There's a story. I take it back. You can dominate with your story if there's a gaping wound. You trump me. And the scar is something that develops over time of sharing your story in safe confines. It's not getting on the phone in Walmart and going over the PA system and airing out your dirty laundry. This is something that, I've talked to you about things that I haven't talked about with a group of people. And as I go through that, I eventually do, because you will be hit with the story. When I was doing CPT therapy in therapy, the doctor said, we're going to do this, but you have to understand it's going to get worse before it gets better. And what that means is you're going to open up some wounds and you're going to let them bleed, because what we do is we go through trauma, and instead of dealing with the wound because that's too painful, we wrap it up, and eventually that bandage isn't enough, and we put something else on it instead of dealing with it, because something touches it. So we put on a new thing, and it's a new layer. And all of a sudden we put so many layers on it because it keeps getting touched that we can't even get out of our house, because the apparatus is so big. We just stay, you know what? I'm not going out. Too many things can happen to me. And that was a wonderful metaphor one of my first mentors, Bahesha, shared with me. And I was like, wow, that's right. But the lion has to rip the thing from his paw. And so that's what CPT therapy was. And it was essentially write your story in great detail and then read it out loud. That's what got me. Was you write it, that's one thing. Read it in your head, that's one thing. Say it out loud. It's like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And then you go and read it to him. And again, you're oozing emotion. And then he says, okay, now go back and rewrite it with even greater detail. And we did that over like 4 or 5 weeks. And it was just like brutal, right? But I had my wife who supported me. She was even in the room eventually with me reading it because I got to be okay. And I wanted her to understand some of what I went through. And because I think it's important for me, it was. And she was able to handle that. And that was really rough, though, honestly. But I had support. I had her. I lost my job, so I was unemployed at that time. So I honestly was not proud of it, but like I laid in the pile of dirty laundry in my basement crying as I was doing chores because it was breaking me so badly at times. And that process changed my life. It was brutal, but I had support. So was I going to share those stories on Instagram? No, I better not. But after 12 years of healing those stories and looking at them in the fourth dimension and seeing how they've impacted my life to this day and how I've made choices based on those reactions to trauma, not the trauma itself, everything was an identity crisis. And because I had no idea who I was, I formed an identity around those traumas and made my decisions based on that. And realizing that was the map and deconstructing it, now I see it much more clearly. Now I'm empowered. I'm emotional. I still can get emotional with these stories, but I can share them with emotion and not be sharing them while controlled by emotion. That's where we get into the situation where we overshare. And that's the risk, is like you go home and you're like, it's kind of like being drunk. Oh my God, what did I do last night? What did I do last night? Oh my God, why did I say that? Why did I share that? Oh, I shouldn't have done that. And I still do that, but much less. And it's much simpler.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's a fine line, of course. I mean, it's hard, but I love the way you put that, which is share with emotion, not while being overwhelmed by emotion or being controlled by emotion. I really like that because I've been getting to a point lately where I've shared my story so much that it's almost like I'm not connected to the feelings anymore because it's just been shared so much. And that's also kind of a dangerous pendulum swing is when you're too far and you're not connecting with your own story. You've got to swing it back to that point where it's like you're finding that connection and being able to experience the emotions that come along with it and not kind of pushing them down. I was actually told by my coach that I needed to be more vulnerable on stage on some of that stuff. So that's those are important reflections.
Yeah. And it's hard too, because obviously this conversation at this moment, we are talking about being a speaker, and that's not going to be the majority of people. Like they're not going to be in a position where they're on stage speaking.
Right.
And so where does that come up in their life? It's going to be different, but there are moments around a campfire that I've been with neighbors where I've been able to share some of my stories, not in gory detail, not in graphic detail, but thematically I can connect to the heart of the detail without giving all of that information. So they feel it, but it's not me jamming trauma down their throats.
Right.
Because that's it quickly, so quickly, that's what it becomes about, is people get really uncomfortable because they're like, yeah, I don't know what to do with everything that's just came at me. It's horrible. Oh my gosh, I feel really bad for you, but this is super uncomfortable. And the goal of our story is never to make people uncomfortable. It might make them confronted in certain ways, but in the least, it's kind of like in karate. You're hitting without lethal force. You're learning how hard you can punch. And in speaking your story, you have to understand, like in any good story, if you're going to take your listener to hell, you got to bring them back to heaven. So if you don't have an hour to bring them back to heaven and you leave them in hell, you went too deep. You went too far. So you have to be recognizing that this is a 2-minute conversation, so I can only go so deep. And how do I connect to those emotions? And that's where we perform our story like a dancer. It's not thought about. It's felt. And that's a really hard thing for some people to do, because when you get too in your head, you're thinking way too much and it becomes this memorized thing, and there's no tangents that are allowed, which is why I let the show go on tangents, because there's beauty in those, because tangents allow you to talk about. Yeah, exactly. Never would have talked about the squirrel if you wouldn't have mentioned it.
Yeah.
Or the fact that in the backyard, there's this like these rabbits, and I don't know if they're trying to mate or fight. So I don't know
Both.
the social system. They like charge at each other, and one jumps in the air, and then it's like, ole.
Yeah,
and then
they
turn around.
just, well, it's just kind of like luck. Like, oh, I made it. Like it's like basketball, but with genitalia.
It could be. Is that how they get a look at the undercarriage?
Yes.
Like, oh, yes. No, let me try one more. Oh, yes.
Right.
You'll do. You'll do, nice laddie.
So how are people living out their story? How do we live out our stories in our daily life? Because we're creating a story every day.
We are. And that's
Yes.
what we don't. I like to tell people, even if you don't think you're a storyteller, you are.
Yeah.
Because you're telling a story every day. If you don't think you're creative, you are. Because we creatively tell ourselves a story about every situation that happens. We make up stories about people at work, about ourselves, about what that driver was thinking when he or she did what he or she did, and how that's our fault or how it's their fault. So at any moment, we're a character in a story. If you go through your day, think of it like a movie, right? You have the hero, you have the victim, you have the villain, and you have other characters, but those are the three main characters that you're going to do. You have supporting characters, the best friend. I mean, there's a whole list of things that you can be playing, and you can become the supporting character in your own life story. And that's where we get into trouble too, in any one of these places. The hero is overcoming obstacles, is taking ownership, but not blaming themselves for everything that goes wrong or everything that goes right as well. They're not giving themselves too much credit. But the victim is helpless. So if you go through your day and everything is outside of your control, there's nothing you can do. There's no way you can change your life. You're writing the story of a victim. If you go through your day, so like in the traffic situation, just driving to work, here's a story. I'm driving and I get cut off. That's the action. The hero says, holy shit, I was close. I'm glad that I was aware of that. And I'm going to be even more aware because, sometimes you can't account for other people's driving. That's the hero. He told himself a story. She told herself a story. And that is empowering. I'm going to be on my guard. Good thing I was on my guard too. The victim is going to say, oh, shoot. That was my bad. I shouldn't be in this lane. I'm not going the right speed limit. And they're probably so mad at me. And I shouldn't even drive. The villain is the accuser. I like to call them the accuser because nothing is ever their fault. So the story that they're telling themselves throughout the day is, asshole driver, you idiot, you don't know who I am. I feel you're lucky I don't pull in front of you and pull you off the road and tear you up. It's very aggressive.
Yeah.
And they're the boisterous victim. They're actually
more
victims.
often than not driving a BMW.
More often than not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to my friend who just bought their daughter a BMW. Not you.
Oof.
Everybody else. Yeah, that's a good first vehicle.
Yeah.
I had an 89 Plymouth Voyager that had one working door and one tweeter that worked. All the other speakers were broken.
Yeah. Ford Escort. Yep.
Hello.
Yep.
Mine was burgundy. It was, I forget, they called it cherry. I think
Cherry.
it's because I was the only person who could drive in my group of friends. So it was like,
hey, me too.
It was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's good. It pays to be the old one in school.
So my first car, my second car was my Ford Escort. That's the one I drove in college, which was a real box of shit. But the first one was a 1982 Toyota Celica, which was fantastic. Still smell like just it was, that old, like you have new car smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you also have old car smell, which was amazing. Like an old car smell was awesome because old car is first car smell. Like that point when you get behind the wheel and it's just this giant like wheel that has no power steering, and you push down the gas and it like barely moves and it gradually kind of goes forward. Yeah, that was my first car.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
I love it. Yeah, so we have those stories that we tell ourselves, and to me,
the moral of the story is don't buy your kids a Beamer. It's just don't.
Yeah, well, or otherwise they're going to be victims. So, and if you want to be an accuser, that's more empowering. It seems like that's kind of the assholes of the world versus the victims who are the weaklings of the world.
Yeah,
but there's a balance between those two, and
they're driving Geostorms. Yes.
Oh, the Geos. It's a good brand there. I had a Geo Tracker, a friend with a Geo Tracker. That thing was hard to get into. Oh my God. Yeah. There's a lot of stories we tell ourselves. That's a very simple example of how every moment of our lives we're telling a story in that moment. We're living a story. We might not be telling it specifically, but more complex than that is the body image issue. I said earlier that our body is oftentimes an outward manifestation of an internal conversation. And if you look at it, the opposite ends of the spectrum, I'm not saying there is one body type that means, oh, you're not telling yourself a disempowering story anymore. Because in any body type, you can be telling yourself an empowering or disempowering story.
100%.
So I like to use, you can look at the super thin, dangerous thin, that can be a self-loathing, a story that's being expressed that I feel like nothingness. So I'm shrinking and shriveling into nothingness. It can be self-abuse. It can be any kind of story. The other end of the spectrum, the morbidly obese, or not even morbidly, but like for me, when I was 235, I wasn't morbidly obese, but I was unhappy. And I was telling myself a story that I didn't want you to have any expectations of me because I would let you down. Don't expect anything from me. So I took care of myself in a way that I felt if you looked at me, you would be like, oh, I'm not surprised he didn't show up.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised he didn't, take this moment and seize it. And when that expectation was low, I gave myself an excuse to not try, even though I was a high achiever. You have people who are 6-pack abs, big muscles. What do they compensate for?
Yeah.
What are they afraid of? I've met several who, talked about the body image. It's never enough. And so they believe they're never enough. All of the stories can be the same. All of them can be rooted in, I believe I'm never enough. So I'm trying to do X, Y, or Z to be enough, and it will never be enough. So though I look healthy, I am broken.
Yeah.
That's not our job to look at someone and say, oh, that person's telling themselves this story. Our story is ours to understand for ourselves, because go out and try to tell someone, oh, I know what story you're telling.
Right.
And watch them not change their life. Watch them change their life by cutting you out of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point, and it gets back to that point of comparison too, that, when we're telling a story, we have our story. Our story is the one thing that we own it. Mm-hmm. We're telling a unique story. It's where we're a creative, this creative living comes from. But if we're going to just compare ourselves to others, we're angry because we're not able to plagiarize somebody else's story. And, if you've ever been to school, I mean, plagiarism is bad. And so we can't, we can't plagiarize somebody else's story just because they do it. If they have a body composition that is naturally thin, or naturally a certain way that you desire to be because you want to be like that person, and you're not, well, it's just like, well, that doesn't mean that you can't consider yourself enough. And you can't, it's okay to consider yourself enough and still live an abundant life and want more out of life and tell the story you want to tell. And man, I wish I'd learned that lesson earlier, because my comparison, my comparison muscle was well worked out into my 30s. Let me tell you that.
Yes. Too bad we don't burn out of that. Like we can burn out dopamine receptors, but too bad we can't. You know what? I'm tired of comparing myself. This imposter stuff's got to go.
Yeah.
That plagiarized someone else's story. I'm stealing that, by the way, because I've never thought of it that way. But that's exactly what we're doing. We're copying someone else's work and expecting it to satisfy ourselves. And where we can also go wrong in that copying is I'm saying I was 235 because I was unhappy. I'm not saying that that's the magic number of once you hit 235, somehow you're obese or whatever. I'm just sharing my story detail.
Sure.
What I realized was that it took me, 2 years to drop down to 185, 190, I think, something like that. 2 years. It was slow, and if we slowly change our lives, because I realized my psyche was the more important part than my physique, because I can change the body. It's kind of the idea of money comes and goes, but time I can never get back. So my mind is more important than whatever you see in the mirror.
100%.
So I had to come to that recognition of like any change that I make fast is not going to be sustainable. So I need to change my mind and figure out why I feel the way I feel. And then the body change is a side effect of that.
Yeah.
But when you're, heavy, or when you're trying to gain muscle or whatever, it takes so much time that the story you're writing isn't seen by anybody else. And we want it to be seen by somebody else. That's where this fast burning fuel, the promise of the fast, lose 10 pounds in a week, whatever, get ready for bikini season, swimsuit season, whatever, seems so appealing because we want people right now to see the transformation we've made. And when that transformation occurs inside your mind, nobody sees how hard you're working. Nobody sees that transformation because you're the one that can feel it, and no one else can feel it. They will feel it. They just won't know they're feeling it because they'll notice a difference in you when you show up to places and all of a sudden you're more confident, you're more engaged, you're more gregarious, like humor comes out of you. Like they will feel it, but they won't know it. They'll be like, wow, you've been working so hard on yourself, haven't you? No one's going to say it. But if I go over the winter and all of a sudden I have a six pack and I take my shirt off, damn, Eric, you're looking good. You've been working hard, huh? I'm like, well, maybe, I don't know, just this little washer box, please. Yeah. But inside you're like, yes, give me. But that's going to burn up real quick.
It is. Yeah. Because what the lasting power is the thing that here's the unfortunate part is even though it doesn't get the immediate response of like, wow, you're looking good right now. You know what that self-confidence and that alignment in your mental health and the strengthening and the building of that nets over time better relationships, stronger relationships, more meaningful relationships where those people don't care about your body issues. That's their body image. They're not commenting on it. Mm-hmm. They're just building a genuine relationship with you. That happens over time. Anything great happens over the long term and takes time to build. It doesn't mean it takes your entire life, though your entire life is a story. But there's chapters all within that we can build upon that you want to build. And if you find yourself saying, well, it's going to take too long to get me there, well, then what the hell are you doing it for anyway? Because as cliche as it sounds, it's like when you read a story, are you thrilled? Are you like, yes? Are you completely like filled up when you reach the end of the book? No, you're probably like, okay, that was a great ending, or you're a little sad that it's over. Mm-hmm. Where you enjoyed it was reading the book, was writing, was reading the story. The joy is in the journey, as cliche as it sounds. I mean, I know it's cliche, but it's cliche because it's true. Yeah. You enjoy the journey, and if you're finding yourself that result's going to take way too long for me, you're picking the wrong thing, my friend. I mean, yeah, focus on your physical health in some ways. Focus on what lifts you up. Focus on your mental health, but focus on relationships, building those things, because that's where the juice is. That's where it happens.
Really is that, and this idea that when we are writing our story and finding out these things that we're off the path a bit, the chapter is coming to an end, whatever the case may be, because you're right. This story, when I'm reading it, I get sad and I start slowly decreasing my reading speed. I don't read as many times in the day or something because I'm like, oh, Armada's coming to an end, or whatever. Same with like a video game, like, oh, I'm about to beat it. Is there any side quests I can do? I want to stay here a little longer. But it's my idea is, what story are you telling yourself right now? And the way you adjust it is not drastic change. It's small pivots. It's you pause, ask yourself, like, what story am I writing in this moment with my reaction? With that reaction I just had, what story did I tell? Oh, I was a tyrant. My God. And you have to be really honest with yourself.
Yep.
And it sucks because you don't want to look at yourself and be like, damn it, I've messed up again. I do that with my kids. I sit down here on my computer after maybe I was upset and I overreacted, and I shake my head and I go, oh, I did it again. I'm going to have to apologize for that one. And I don't like feeling that way because I just want to nail it, right? I want to do it right. I want to be the hero all the time, but I'm not. I'm a tyrant sometimes. I'm a victim sometimes, but I'm not all the time.
This is where the power of story just really comes into, is because you're building the characters. You know what characters you're going to fall in love with. And if you're not going to fall in love with the main character, which is you, then, it's not going to be a compelling story. But you only fall in love with the characters who do go through challenges, who do go through that doesn't, or the characters that do experience some suffering in their life and work to overcome it, work to rise above it. That doesn't mean that you're a piece of shit. Like your brain's telling you. The antagonist in these stories is often our brains, that's telling us
Yeah.
these lies about ourselves. I know that I've been through that a lot. It's just like whenever I fuck up or I screw up, I think to myself, man, what a piece of shit I am. Man, I'm such, and it goes to that vicious language. Like, it's like, God, why can't I just do better? Why can't I do, more of this? Why can't I just have the right conversations? Why can't I say the right things? Why can't I not stumble over my words? Or why do I have to be so worried about what other people think of me? Why am I so anxious? Well, because I'm writing a freaking epic story here. And I'm, and it's and those are the kinds of things that have to happen in order for a story to be amazing.
Yeah. And I've talked to people, and I always say I talk to people because I don't want to name them. So whenever I say they do exist, I just don't want to be like Jack Bartholomew when he was
I know
talking
some guys. I know some guys.
Guys down in little town, he was talking to me about this story, right? And he got a chip in the windshield. I'm like, no big deal. What's the big whoop? Hey, you're going to forget about it, move on with your day, all right? No, I don't say that to Joe. I say, you got pissed off because it inconvenienced you? That's valid.
Yep.
Okay, that's valid. Like, are you going around moping all day saying, woe is me? No, you fixed it. And then it happened again the next day. And they're like, Jesus Christ, like what is my life? I got 2 chipped windshields. I wouldn't want that either. And I've been through things worse than a chipped windshield. But the reality is our heroic journey is the acceptance that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And pain is where our life expectation doesn't match up with our life. That's pain. Suffering is believing we have no power over it, that we are at the whim of the pain, and that we are meant to suffer for our whole lives and cannot change that fate. Yeah. That's false, because our reaction to the event is what writes the story. In the moment of reaction, we do tell ourselves a story. We react from the recent past story we've told ourselves. That's all mobilized in this moment. The recognition of that truth is where we get to pivot and pause and reflect and say, hey, no, oh man, I shouldn't complain about this because there's people who are starving and people who are homeless, and that's all true, but your emotions aren't lying to you. They're just not telling you the full truth of the situation. You really feel this way. Accept it and then reflect on it. Make your pivot and pursue the new path. Like, get it fixed, whatever it is, but validate the emotion. Just don't let it control you. Just like when I said we were sharing for our speech, we share with emotion. We let them be part of us, but we don't let them control us. Otherwise, we become the victim. We become the villain. We become the antagonist of the story. We become a bystander, whatever it is. We are stopping being the hero when we let that throw us off, or when we belittle our own story because it's not big enough to cause this pain, for us to feel pain. We should be stronger than this. No, stop telling yourself that story.
Yeah.
Everyone has a story they're telling themselves. Everyone is deserving to live an empowered life, and empowered life does not mean pain-free. Absolutely requires you to go through pain. Your pain is going to look different than mine. Yeah. And that's okay. It's actually designed that way, I think.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd all be suffering the same. Like, well, we're screwed. The same thing happened to all of us, and we can't go to work.
Every story, every person has a story, and you could choose to have an epic adventure, like, something like Ted Lasso, where there's so many great characters that come together beautifully, or you could be Woody Allen, where it's just a series of complaints all over and over again. So you have that choice, and that's such a freeing choice too, when you can look at that and say, do I want to have my story be like Ted Lasso, which I was trying to think about, like that whole series, which I don't know about you, Eric, but I really loved it. I mean, I love
my favorites
whole
of all time.
Series. Yeah. And it's an incredibly well put together story. And I was just like, well, what do I like about it? I mean, the characters are great. Yes, I love the characters. The characters are all lovable. Is it because is it because it's clean humor? No, they get dirty. They curse all the time, up and down in that show. I'm like, okay, it's not that. Is it because there's no conflict? No, there's tons of conflict in it. I mean, is it because the main characters are perfect? No, Ted Lasso himself has an anxiety disorder, panic attacks. So it's very relatable for me. Lots of characters are struggling with certain things: anger, narcissism, identity crises, all sorts of things. And so there's not lacking of that conflict. So what is it? It's this idea that we look at all of them as every character in that show as the opportunity to be a hero, and we're rooting for them all. And that's the beauty. I mean, at least for me, that's the beauty I found of it. So if you build a story like Ted Lasso, you can build a story around being the underdog or being the person that you want to root for, and even despite the conflict.
Oh yeah, and everyone was redeemed too, and no one went so far except for Rupert. I believe he kind of walked off into the darkness, but everyone else, Nate, spoiler alert, every story was redeemed.
Yes.
In a very satisfying. Okay, I wanted, again, spoiler alert, so skip. I wanted Ted to stay and move his whole family to England, but I can't get everything I want. I'm moving on from it. I had my cry. Why, Ted? Why do you choose your family? Why can't they move to where you're in England and you're going to the Champions League?
Kansas sucks, Ted.
Oh my God.
Sucks.
You kidding me? England versus Kansas? Easy choice. Yeah. Anyway, the one compliment I got a while back, a year or two, I forget when Ted Lasso started, but I was on this podcast and the guy said, "Do you know who you remind me of?" It's like, who? Ted Lasso. You kind of look like him, and the way you talk reminds me of Ted Lasso. And I had never heard of Ted Lasso. I was like, oh, cool. I have no idea who he is, but thanks. And then I watched Ted Lasso and I'm like, me? You think I remind you of my hero now? Indiana Jones and Ted Lasso. Those are my two heroes. So
nice.
Find somewhere in between there and you have the complete man.
Yeah, you combine. You just combine it. Hey there, show it round. Why don't we go to?
Except for the whole Ravenwood thing with potentially him dating a 14-year-old when he was like 25 or whatever. That little thing that I think Disney even removed that line from it. I'm gonna have to go watch it again because it's on Disney Plus. But I remember there was controversy. I was just a young girl, and if you do the math, it ended up being like she was 13 or 14. And she was a student with Indy and he was 25 or whatever. And they hooked up at some point. And so, and he's like, you were old enough to know what you were doing. And I think they took that out now because it's minorly predatory.
Very wise.
I was like,
bad math. Let's chalk it up to bad math.
Yeah, we'll say that. But it was back in the 40s. So I think it was legal to marry at 14 or something. So there was like, they were maybe they were just being a little too accurate with their world building.
Yeah.
I don't know. I still love him. I'm forgiving him for that because it's fiction. Okay.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. But that's a good combination. Yeah. To have is Ted Lasso and Indiana Jones. And I would throw in there some Magnum PI, personally.
Well, I agree.
He was supposed to be Indiana Jones, by the way, but yeah.
I'm glad he wasn't because
Me too.
I don't know if we could have handled that much masculinity in one person.
Yeah. There's a lot of masculinity there, but I just want a little more hair on the chest, but.
Oh yeah. Well, and his mustache is iconic, of course, but I'd never had the tall enough lip area to do the full on like Magnum PI mustache. It's a bit thin, so it doesn't quite work. I look creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. Not a lot of people can pull off a mustache. I know I can't, but
I think you have the space for it. Well, I mean, that's a different podcast. We'll talk about Adam's facial hair hopes in the future. Maybe we'll even do a show where we shave our faces and into uncomfortable positions. I don't know. I want to try a little cowboy mustache, maybe. My wife would not be supportive of that, I suppose. So scratch it. We'll talk about other stuff. Plenty to talk about. But that's kind of the pivot we're making with the show. It's not much of a pivot, but it is because I do plan on hosting some event things too, where we talk about how to share your story and different archetypes that you can play, like the orphan, the wanderer, the seeker, the magician, the royal, the emperor. There's a lot of archetypes that we play at any given moment. And when we start to understand what one we're acting as, we can see where we are in our story. And that's exciting because sometimes we're coming to the conclusion of a chapter and we're supposed to be looking for the next adventure, or we don't realize that we've learned enough. Now we have to give that information away to somebody. We have to mentor someone in some way, because it's all a process of growth and service. It's this rotating thing. So realizing where we are in our story at any given point and feeling the discomfort of whatever we feel defines where we are, and it kind of helps us understand what our next step is. So there's a lot of presentations and things that I want to invite people to as we go as well. So there's going to be, this opens the door for more opportunity is what I'm trying to say. Is this not just
a webinar?
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
No.
Would you want to join me for that, Adam?
I would.
Oh my gosh, I do it. He's my best friend and he said yes. I can't wait to tell my wife. Actually, she probably hear me. She's in the next room. Maddie, my dog, came over and was like, he said yes. Oh, that's good news.
Hey Jenna, I'm going to be on Eric's webinar.
That sounds great. Wow, she's really supportive.
That's incredible. Yeah. Wow,
she has a very strange voice when she's excited. It sounds a lot like me doing a weird high-pitched squeal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
anyway.
So my question is, do we even though we did this big change, do we still get to sign out by saying bye?
I was thinking about it and I'm like, did I lose it? I mean, we can try it out for posterity and see how it goes. So, until next time, drink well, my friends, and as always,
bye.
That was sexual the way you did it, I think.
It was.
Bye.
Bye.